How many nights have already gone by without anyone setting that table before turning in? Don't ask that out loud, ask yourself. Tonight, when you switch off the light and leave the kitchen exactly as it was after supper, dishes washed, the cloth folded away, nothing more. Do you know what happens in that silence? Not the silence of the house, the silence of the soul. Saint Teresa of Avila knew. She wrote it down. She warned us in that voice of hers, one that never threatened, but opened eyes with love. And her warning was not meant for just any time of year. It was meant for these days, for the nights stretching between now and the beginning of Holy Week, for the nights that still lie ahead of you. Teresa was not talking about decorations or quaint old customs. She was speaking of something that bears directly on the spiritual condition of your home, on those who have already left your family, and on what God can or cannot do in a heart that is closed off without knowing it. Something happens every night in homes that do not prepare themselves during these days before Holy Week. Something the living cannot sense, but the souls of their departed can. Teresa saw it. She described it with a clarity that still astonishes today. And what you are about to hear has been held back for this moment in your life, because there are truths that can only be received when the soul is finally ready to hear them. Stay with this. Every part of what follows holds up the next. To understand what Saint Teresa warned about the table and the nights before Holy Week, you first need to understand what Teresa herself meant by the word table. Not the piece of furniture, not the wood. Not the place where the family eats and then scatters, each one off to their room and their own quiet corner. For Teresa, the table came from somewhere far deeper than any family habit or cultural tradition. It came from Scripture, from the very heart of faith, from an understanding of the sacred she had been building since childhood, kneeling on cold floors, eyes shut, soul open wide as a window in summer. She knew Psalm 23 by heart. She had prayed it since she was a girl, in that house in Avila, where her father read aloud in the evenings and the children sat perfectly still and listened. "You prepare a table before me." For Teresa, that line was not a poetic image or a preacher's turn of phrase. It was a declaration about how God actually works. God prepares, God arranges. God does not arrive to find everything bare and cold and dark. God arrives and the table is already set, because He Himself said it. And if God acts this way toward His children, what does the way we treat our own table during the holiest days of the year say about us? In the convent of Saint Joseph in Avila, which Teresa founded with her own hands, in a poverty that sometimes bordered on the impossible, the refectory table was not an afterthought. It was woven into the spiritual fabric of the community. When the sisters came together to eat, it was not merely a matter of feeding the body. It was a moment of shared presence, of concrete gratitude, of communion that needed no words to be real. Teresa insisted that the table be laid before the sisters arrived. It did not matter how little there was that day. It did not matter whether the bread was scarce or the soup was the simplest imaginable. The table had to be ready, set, waiting for those who would come and sit. She explained to her nuns that setting the table before they sat down was as genuine an act of faith as praying the divine office. It was a way of saying to God, without a word, "We believe you will provide." It was saying to each sister without a syllable spoken, "I expected you, I knew you were coming. This place was made ready with you in mind." It was creating a visible sign in the physical space of something taking place in the invisible space of the soul. A home that sets its table is a home that is waiting. And God, Teresa would say, with that certainty of hers that asked no one's permission and admitted no negotiation, never fails the one who waits with the table laid and the heart open. But there is something more that Teresa understood about the table, something that comes directly from the gospel, from a scene she had meditated on for years, drawing out every drop of spiritual meaning it contained. The Last Supper was not a spontaneous affair. It was not something Jesus decided on at the last minute. He sent his disciples ahead with precise instructions. You will find a man, follow him. He will show you a large upper room already furnished. Already furnished. Those two words lodged themselves in Teresa every time she read them. The most sacred room in the entire history of salvation was not improvised. It was prepared in advance. Someone, before they arrived, had made sure everything was in its place. And on that prepared table, Jesus instituted the Eucharist, broke the bread, spoke the words that changed the world forever. Words that still echo in every Mass celebrated in every corner of the earth. Teresa drew a line between that gesture and the daily life of a household in a way that struck her contemporaries as sometimes too simple to be profound and sometimes too profound to be simple. She said that every table laid in a Christian home is a distant echo of that table in the upper room in Jerusalem. Not in the liturgical sense. That belongs to the Eucharist alone and cannot be confused with anything else, but in the deepest spiritual sense. Whoever sets a table with love and faith is doing in miniature what God does on the grand scale, creating a space of encounter, saying, without uttering a single syllable, that in this home someone is expected, someone is welcomed, someone is received, and whatever is here will be shared, even if it isn't much. And this is where Teresa's warning begins to take on a shape that is no longer abstract, but concrete, urgent, personal. Because if setting the table is a spiritual act, carrying a weight that far exceeds the domestic, then leaving it empty is one too. Failing to prepare the table is not simply skipping a gesture. It communicates something to the space of the home, to the souls that draw near in these days, to God Himself who is watching. It is an absence that speaks more forcefully than many words. And during the nights between now and the beginning of Holy Week, that absence speaks louder than at any other moment of the liturgical year. Why these nights in particular? What is it about this season that turns an empty table from a domestic oversight into something Teresa considered serious enough to warn about? What happens in the spiritual world during these nights? Something the living cannot perceive, but the souls of their departed feel with unmistakable clarity. The answer lies in something Teresa lived firsthand, something that took her breath away, and something she described with a precision that still, centuries on. Something happens in the spiritual world during the days that lead up to Holy Week, and most devoted Catholics sense it without being able to name it. They feel it in the way the air of these days carries a different weight, in the way the silence of late Lenten nights has a density unlike the silence of any other time of year, in the way memories of those who have gone come without being summoned, with a sharpness that sometimes hurts and sometimes consoles, and almost always does both at once. This is not imagination. It is not the accumulated effect of fasting or penance. It is something real, and Saint Teresa of Avila described it with a clarity that her own age could barely contain. Teresa taught that liturgical time is not a human calendar. It is not a convenient arrangement that the Church invented to organize the year. It is a genuine spiritual reality that affects both the visible and invisible worlds in ways that reason alone cannot measure. When the Church enters its great seasons, something stirs in the deepest layers of reality. The veil separating the living from the dead, the veil that in ordinary days is opaque and firm, grows thin, not transparent, not torn, but more permeable, more sensitive, thinner than at any other point in the liturgical year. And this thinning is not a metaphor. It is a reality Teresa experienced in her own prayer with an intensity that left her speechless, and then drove her to find words for it because she felt she could not keep it to herself. She did not say this as a mystical curiosity reserved for souls far advanced in contemplation. She said it as a truth with practical consequences for every Christian family, For every home where someone has loved and lost and goes on living with that sweet, aching weight that the absence of the departed leaves behind. Because if the veil grows thin during these days, then the souls of a family's loved ones draw near. They come. They are present in a way the living do not perceive with the body's eyes, but which some feel in that deeper part of themselves that has not yet fully learned to ignore the invisible. They draw close, the way someone who loves draws close. Someone who has not forgotten, who from where they are still keeps watch over those they left behind. They are drawn by the bonds of love that death severs in the body, but cannot sever in the soul, because the soul does not die, and the love that lived within it does not die either. Saint Teresa had experienced this directly. In the book of her life, she described how, during seasons of highest liturgical intensity, her awareness of the souls in purgatory sharpened in a way that did not happen in ordinary periods of the year. She felt their closeness with a vividness that forced her to stop whatever she was doing and give that time over to prayer for them. She felt their need. She felt too, with a mixture of sorrow and compassion that left her prostrate for hours, what those souls were seeking from the living they had left behind. They were not seeking lamentation. They were not seeking their families paralyzed with grief or living with eyes turned permanently backward, unable to move forward. They were seeking something far more concrete, far more within reach, far more beautiful than any of that. They were looking for signs that they had not been forgotten. They were hoping to find, in the homes where they once lived, in the families they once loved, in the spaces where their lives unfolded, some gesture that would say in the silent language of tangible things, "You are still here with us. We remember you every day. Our love for you has not gone cold, even though you can no longer sit at this table with us." That gesture for Teresa did not need to be grand or costly or visible to anyone but God and the soul receiving it. It could be as quiet as a candle lit on the table before the lights go out. It could be as simple as not leaving that table empty during the nights remaining before Holy Week arrives. And here is the connection Teresa drew, with a firmness that left no room for alternative readings, no room for the comfortable notion that these things don't really matter. The souls of the departed, during these specific nights, draw near to the home they loved. They come. They are present in a way the living do not perceive with the body's eyes, but which some sense in that deeper place within themselves that has not yet fully learned to tune out the invisible. And when they arrive, the first thing they encounter, the first thing that speaks to them without words about the spiritual state of that home, is the table. The table where that soul spent years of their life, where they broke bread with those they loved, where they heard laughter and arguments and silences heavy with meaning, where they were part of something alive, something death interrupted in the visible realm, but which in the spiritual realm goes on beating still. What does a bare, dark, unprepared table say to a soul that comes with love during these nights? What does that soul experience when the home it cherished has arranged nothing, lit no light, left no sign to say, "We remember you here, we are waiting for you"? Teresa saw this. She lived it in her own mystical experience, and what she saw moved her to write something her sisters copied out with a seriousness unusual even for them, because they recognized in those words a truth that came from very deep and that arrived directly at the center of something they too had felt without being able to name it. But what Teresa wrote about that moment was not what you would expect to hear from a saint who had seen hell with her own spiritual eyes and knew perfectly well what she meant when she spoke of spiritual consequences. It was not a condemnation. It was not a threat. It was something that hurts in a completely different way. Something that, once you hear it, you cannot stop recognizing in your own life, your own home, and all those nights that have already gone by without anyone ever telling you they could have been different. What the soul of a departed loved one is seeking when it draws near to the home. During these nights is not pity in the sense the living understand that word. It is not the spectacle of a family weeping through the night, trapped in grief, as though time stopped the day of the funeral and has never moved again. That does not help the soul. In fact, Teresa described how it saddens the soul in a way that is precise and leaves no comfortable room to look away. The soul that has gone does not want to see those it left behind destroyed by its absence. It wants to see them alive, steady, walking toward God with the same faith it learned to walk by when it was still here, when it could still take the hand of those it loved and say out loud what it can now only say from within the silence. What the soul is looking for is something different, something that has to do with the continuity of love, with the certainty that bonds which death severed in the visible plane are still alive in the spiritual one, with concrete, tangible evidence, perceptible even from where the soul now is, that this home has not closed its heart, that the living are still open, still disposed, still ready, that the faith they shared together around that table has not gone out since the soul departed, but still burns, quieter perhaps, stilled, but burning yet with the same essence of love that fed it through all the years they spent together. Teresa explained this in a way her sisters grasped immediately, because they had felt it before they could name it. When a soul has loved its family deeply, when it spent years building a home, raising children, sitting down each evening at that table, sharing bread and worries and the small joys that make up the true texture of a life, that bond does not dissolve with the death of the body. It remains. And from where the soul now is, that bond is still real, still sensitive, still capable of receiving or not receiving what the living do or leave undone in the home they once shared. Now sit with this honestly as you can. These nights between now and the beginning of Holy Week are nights when the veil is thin, nights when the soul draws near with an ease it does not have at other moments of the year, nights when the distance between the two worlds narrows in a way that Teresa did not hesitate to call real, and which the Church has always recognized in its understanding of the great liturgical seasons. And on these nights, the soul comes home. It crosses that narrow distance with the same direction it always had in life, toward its own, toward the place where it was loved, toward the table where it spent so many years of its life seated, and it finds the table empty, not prepared, dark. No gesture left to say that in this home, someone knew it might come, that something was left burning for it, that this space remains open even though the soul can no longer sit here with us the way it once did. Teresa wrote about this moment with a precision that crosses the centuries and arrives intact today. She described the state of a soul that comes and finds no sign of welcome in the home it loved. She did not describe it with words of catastrophe or images of eternal condemnation. She described it with something that hurts far more than that, precisely because it is closer, more intimate, more recognizable for anyone who has ever loved and felt that love go unmatched. She described it with sorrow, a particular clean sorrow, free of anger or resentment, that the soul experiences when it understands that the living, without meaning to, without ever consciously deciding to forget, have let the cold into a space that once held warmth. And here is the question no one wants to sit with, but that once it appears in full clarity, cannot be pushed aside or put off indefinitely. How many of these nights have already passed since Lent began, with the table left bare? Not because you wanted to forget those who have gone, not because your love for them has dimmed by so much as a fraction since the day you lost them, simply because no one ever told you these nights were different from all the others. No one ever sat down with you to explain that what you do or leave undone in your home during this specific season carries a spiritual weight that far exceeds the domestic and the decorative. because this is not about a single night. It is not a gesture you make once and consider done. It is about every night that remains between now and Palm Sunday. Each night is a window that opens at dusk and closes at dawn without ever being recoverable. Each night is a moment in which the soul of someone you loved may draw near to this home and find something or find nothing. And the accumulation of those nights, those possible encounters that never took place, those signs of love that were available to be left and yet were not left. That accumulation carries a weight Teresa did not flinch from naming clearly, even when that clarity was uncomfortable. But what Teresa said next was not what her sisters expected. It was not a verdict. It was not a list of failures or a reckoning of everything left undone. It was the revelation of something altogether different. It was the description of a gesture so simple, so within the reach of any pair of hands, so full of genuine grace, that when you hear it, you will wonder how it was possible that no one ever said it to you before, this plainly, at this exact moment in your life. In The Way of Perfection, Teresa of Avila wrote about hospitality in a way her sisters did not expect to find, in a text devoted to prayer and the interior life. She was not talking about receiving visitors graciously or keeping the convent's common areas tidy for guests. She was talking about something deeper, something interior, something to do with the soul's permanent disposition, rather than any visible arrangement of physical spaces. She said that true hospitality does not begin when the other person arrives. It begins earlier. It begins in the precise moment when you prepare to receive them, when you arrange the space, when you light the lamp, when you place something there that says without a word that you were expected here, and this place was made ready with you in mind. In her own words, in The Way of Perfection, Teresa wrote that love which does not prepare to receive is love that has not yet finished growing. Because mature love does not wait to see whether someone will come before scrambling to put something together at the last moment. Mature love already has everything ready before the other appears. Because its certainty about that love is so firm, so deeply rooted, so free from the doubt that paralyzes, that it needs no outward confirmation before it stirs and acts. Teresa applied this teaching directly to the relationship between the living and their loved ones who have gone. And here she closed something that had been left open from the very first words of this time we have shared. The prepared table is not an empty ritual. It is not superstition dressed up as popular piety. It is not domestic magic inherited from times the Church neither recognizes nor endorses. It is an act of mature love. It is saying to the soul of someone who has gone, in the silent, concrete language of gestures that need no explanation, that this home is still theirs in the deepest, most spiritual sense of that word, that they haven't been erased from the family's heart, that when they draw near during these nights before the holiest days of the year, they find something waiting. But Teresa went further still, because she had that habit of never resting on the surface of anything, of following the thread until she reached the center where the whole truth lay. She explained that setting the table during the nights before Holy Week is not only a gesture toward the departed, it is also, and perhaps chiefly, a gesture toward God. Because God looks at the hearts of homes during these days with a particular attentiveness He does not bring to the ordinary seasons of the year. He sees which homes arrange their interior space with the same seriousness and faith with which the Church prepares its altars for the sacred days. And what He sees in that table, in that readiness or in that emptiness, tells Him something about the spiritual condition of that family that no words spoken aloud could convey with the same honesty or the same clarity. The prepared table is a prayer without words. It is a quiet confession of faith in the communion of saints, that communion we recite in the Creed without always pausing to consider what we are saying. That communion is not a poetic phrase meant to comfort those who grieve. It is a reality so concrete it can be expressed by a gesture as small as spreading a clean cloth, leaving something on the table, lighting a candle before turning off the light and heading to bed. Teresa pressed this point precisely because she understood the human tendency to reach for the grand, the visible, the admirable, and to overlook the fact that God works preferentially in the small, the silent, the unseen. Teresa spoke from her own experience when she said this. Her years of prayer had taught her that God responds to gestures made in faith in ways that far exceed whatever those gestures appear to deserve on their own, seen only from the outside. A small act done in genuine love carries, in the spiritual world, a weight that no large work performed out of obligation or habit can match, however much it impresses those who witness it. And a home that prepares itself, that does not leave the table bare on these nights, that sets out even something simple as a sign of waiting and of love, is doing something that resonates in dimensions the eyes cannot see, but which the soul perceives with a clarity requiring no proof. Now at this point, the practical question arises, and it should. It is the question of someone who does not want to rest with intellectual understanding alone, but wants to know how to bring this into their actual life, their actual kitchen, their actual nights with their real tiredness and their genuine love for those who have gone. If setting the table is a spiritual act carrying the weight Teresa described, then what does it actually mean to do it well? What goes on the table? What words, if any, accompany the gesture? What intention makes it not just a movement of hands, but a real prayer that reaches where it is meant to reach? Teresa answered this, and her answer is more accessible, more within reach, more possible for any household than you might imagine right now. When Teresa spoke of setting the table, she was not describing a complex ceremony requiring specialized knowledge, hard-to-find objects, or a level of mystical formation most people neither have nor will ever have. She was speaking about something any pair of hands can do, something any home, regardless of its size, its resources, the number of people who live there, or the accumulated weight of years each of them carries, can carry out every night in the days remaining before Holy Week. She was speaking of a gesture that is born in the heart, and that the heart can sustain night after night without it becoming mechanical, without it losing its original warmth, without it turning into an empty routine performed out of habit rather than love. The first thing Teresa indicated, and which the Church's tradition has preserved in various forms across the centuries, in the most devoted homes throughout Christendom, is intention. Before any visible gesture, before placing anything on the table, the heart must be made ready. This means taking a moment. It need not be long. It does not have to be an hour of prayer kneeling on the cold kitchen floor. It can last no longer than it takes to spread a cloth or to light a candle. But in that moment, there must be a conscious, deliberate interior decision. I am doing this with love. I am doing it for those I have lost. I am doing it so this home does not close its heart during these nights that are unlike any other in the year. Intention changes everything. Teresa returned to this in different forms throughout her entire body of work, not repeating herself, but going deeper each time. A gesture made without intention and the same gesture made with intention are two entirely different acts in the spiritual realm, however identical they appear in the visible one. The outward form may be the same. The interior weight is incomparable, and what reaches the soul of the departed, what God perceives in that home when He looks with the particular attentiveness He brings to these days, depends on that intention more than on anything else that might be done or left undone. The second thing is light, a candle. Nothing more is needed to begin. A candle lit on the table before going to bed is one of the oldest gestures in the Christian faith to signal that in this space there is someone who waits, who prays, who has not shut the eyes of the soul, even though the eyes of the body will soon close in rest. Teresa lived surrounded by candlelight in her convent life and understood its spiritual language with a depth she tried to put into words in her writings, and never quite felt satisfied that she had managed it. A flame burning in the dark says something that words cannot say with the same simplicity and strength at once. It says, there is life here, there is warmth here, someone was awake in this place, even if they are sleeping now. The third thing is something on the table that represents shared nourishment. It does not have to be a full meal. It does not have to be plentiful, carefully prepared, or visible to anyone but the eyes that watch from the other side of the veil. It can be a piece of bread, a glass of water, the plainest thing the home has that evening. What matters is not the quantity or the presentation. What matters is that there is something, that the table is not bare, that whoever arrives in the night, visible or invisible, finds a sign that in this home things are shared, things are given. The other is sustained with what is there, even when what is there is not much. Teresa spoke of this gesture, the bread and the water, with a particular tenderness her sisters recognized, knowing it came from her own experience of poverty and spiritual abundance. She connected it to the hospitality of the gospel, to the widow who shared her last oil, not knowing that gesture would change everything, to the multiplication of the loaves, which did not begin with the surplus of those who had more than enough, but with the courageous smallness of someone who placed in God's hands the only thing they had, trusting that He would do with it something no human abundance could accomplish on its own. The fourth element, and this Teresa emphasized in a way her sisters never forgot, is to speak the name. Before going to bed, say aloud, or in the deepest interior silence, the name of the person you are remembering that night. Not with the desperation of someone unable to let go. Not with the grief that drags and will not let you move forward. With peace. With the quiet serenity of someone who knows that name has been known to God since before time began. And that to speak it in faith is to join one small, limited human voice to the divine voice that calls each soul by name from eternity and loses none of them. That name spoken over a prepared table is, according to Teresa, the most concrete bridge between the visible gesture and the invisible reality that gesture touches. It is what transforms a cloth and a candle and a piece of bread into a genuine prayer. It is what gives that quiet, domestic act the spiritual weight she promised it carries. And it is what the soul of the departed receives in a way Teresa described, with an image that stays with you long after you have heard it. One that does not leave, even as the years pass and circumstances change and the world goes on turning with its usual indifference to the things of the soul. There are homes that sleep differently. It is not something any instrument can measure or any purely rational argument can sustain all the way to the end without faltering. But those who have lived it recognize it immediately without needing anyone to confirm it. There are houses where the night is heavy, where rest will not come however exhausted the body is, where something in the air has a weight that does not lift no matter how many windows are opened, or how many things are rearranged, or how faithfully the rosary is prayed with the best will in the world. And there are houses where the night is different, where the silence has a texture that consoles without a word being said, where sleep arrives with a gentleness that feels like a gift no one asked for, but someone decided to give anyway, where something in those rooms says you are not alone, even though no one else is visibly there beside you. Teresa of Avila understood this difference at a depth that went far beyond intuition. She had experienced it in her own convent nights, in the different houses of the foundations she established across Spain, with an energy that astonished everyone who watched her work, and in the homes of families who received her on her travels and who confided in her, some with embarrassment and others with the relief of someone finally able to say something, long held in silence, what they felt in their houses when night came. and Teresa had reached a conclusion that was mystical, not in the sense of being beyond reach, but mystical in the sense of being true. The spiritual condition of a home at night depends greatly on what that home did before the darkness fell. A home that prepares itself spiritually before sleeping, that does not leave its table bare, that lights even a small flame, that speaks the names of its departed with love. That home is doing something with consequences that last through the whole night and accumulate from night to night in a way the soul of that family gradually perceives, even without always having a name for what it is perceiving. It is not protecting the house with magic or performing any rite the church does not recognize as its own. It is simply disposing its heart the same way Teresa disposed hers before her night prayer, with openness towards the invisible, with faith that God works while the household sleeps, with the certainty that what one leaves prepared before closing one's eyes carries a weight that does not dissolve with the morning. Teresa described in various passages of her work what changes in a home when its people begin to live with this awareness night after night. She did not describe spectacular changes that no one could overlook. She was not speaking of visions or extraordinary phenomena reserved for the great mystics who are the exception and not the rule. She spoke of things anyone can recognize in their own experience if they pay the kind of attention they usually save for other things. A greater ease in letting go of the day's small tensions before sleep, those small tensions that at night grow large if the heart does not release them in time. A sense that rest genuinely repairs not only the body, but something deeper that the body alone cannot touch. A readiness in the morning that cannot be explained simply by having slept well, but by something that happened during the night and that the soul received even though the mind did not register it. And alongside all of this, something that bears directly on the family's departed. Teresa expressed this in a way her sisters found both consoling and challenging, because it required them to make a decision that could not be put off indefinitely. She said that when the living prepare their home with love during these nights, the souls of their departed who draw near do not only find what they were looking for, they find something more. They find evidence that the love they shared in life was not cut off by death, but transformed into something death cannot touch. And that evidence enables them to do something that otherwise cost them a great deal in the process of purification, that Teresa knew from the inside, having interceded for many souls and witnessed what helped them and what did not. Because there is something Teresa understood about purgatory that can get lost when theology grows too abstract for those who are not theologians, but who love their dead with a love that needs no explanation. The souls in that process of purification are not standing still, waiting for time to pass. They are in motion, they are being actively transformed. And that movement can be more or less free, more or less agile, depending in part on what the living do for them from this side. Prayer for the dead is not a pious gesture that comforts those who remain. It is a spiritual reality with real consequences for the souls who receive it. Teresa knew this because she had seen it, and a table set with love during these nights is part of that prayer, even without a single word. So what happens in the home that does not do this? What exactly is the warning Teresa spoke over these nights? It is not what most people imagine when they hear the word warning from the mouth of a saint. And when you hear it, something in you will understand why Teresa chose that particular word, that one and no other, to describe what happens in a home that reaches Holy Week without having prepared anything during the nights preceding it. The word Teresa used was not punishment, it was not condemnation. It was not any of the words one might expect from a warning spoken by someone who had looked upon hell with her own spiritual eyes and knew perfectly well what she meant when she spoke of consequences that outlast a lifetime. The word Teresa used, the one her sisters recalled decades later when they passed on this teaching to those who came to hear them, was a word that hurts differently. a word that does not crush, but opens. That does not close doors, but points to the one that has been shut for a long time and asks someone to decide to open it, before the moment comes when there are no more chances to do so. The word was indifference. She did not use it as an accusation or an insult or a way of making anyone feel wretched. She used it as a diagnosis. With the precision of someone who has spent years looking at the condition of the human soul and has learned to name what she sees, without softening it beyond recognition or hardening it more than necessary. A home that arrives at these nights before Holy Week without setting its table, without arranging any gesture of welcome, without lighting any flame to say that those who are gone are remembered and loved. That home is not being malicious or rebellious or hostile to God. It is being indifferent. And indifference, Teresa said, with that firmness of hers that asks no one's permission, is the quietest and hardest to correct form of shutting the door to grace. Because a sin that is recognized can be brought to confession and come away clean. A mistake that is seen can be put right that very afternoon. But indifference does not recognize itself. It disguises itself as normality. It hides behind the rhythm of ordinary days. It justifies itself with genuine tiredness, with real demands on the time, with the comfortable certainty that there will always be another night to do what this night did not get done. And so, the nights go by, one after another, each one with its window that opens at dusk and closes at dawn, each one with its thinned veil and its soul that arrives searching, and its table with nothing to offer. And the accumulation of those empty nights is not neutral. It settles into the home in a way those who live there may not consciously perceive, but which the soul of that home absorbs, night by night, without anyone giving it a name. Teresa did not describe this as a tragedy with no way out. She was never a teacher of fear or of the crushing despair that paralyzes. She was always a teacher of loving urgency. The kind of urgency that does not say it is too late, but says there is still time, though that time has a concrete limit, and its name is Holy Week. And when it arrives, something will have happened in your home during these nights. Something that was either met with love or allowed to pass by unnoticed, without anyone realizing what was being missed. Because Holy Week does not wait, or adjust itself, or arrive more slowly, because a home was not ready. It comes with its full weight, with mysteries that are the deepest and greatest of the entire liturgical year, with its capacity to transform what it finds prepared and to barely graze the surface of what it finds closed in on itself. Not because God is a judge who punishes the latecomer, but because grace needs a vessel. It needs a heart, a home, a family that has made even the smallest gesture of saying with their hands and their intention, "We are ready, there is room here, we are waiting for what you are bringing." Teresa saw this in her own foundations. In the book of her foundations, she described, without naming anyone, but with a clarity her readers have always recognized, the difference between communities that received her with everything prepared and those that received her with everything improvised. Where there was preparation, there was also an openness, a readiness of the collective soul that allowed grace to move with a freedom and a speed that in other places took far longer to appear. The outward preparation was always a reflection of something interior, and that interior something was what God found when He looked. Bring that now into your home, into these specific nights still ahead of you before Palm Sunday arrives and Holy Week begins. Every night that remains is a night that can be different from those already gone. Not because you can recover what was left undone in previous nights. Time does not turn back, and Teresa never promised it would. But because each night carries its own grace, its own opening, its own thin veil, and its own soul that comes hoping to find something saying it has not been forgotten. Teresa's warning does not end with the diagnosis. It never did. There was always a next step. Always a door to point to after pointing to the one that stood closed. And that next step, which Teresa indicated with the full authority of her mystical experience and her boundless love for souls, both those still walking here and those already walking elsewhere, is what brings everything to its close that has been building since the very beginning. And it has to do with a promise that is waiting to be received. Teresa's promise was not addressed to the perfect. That is the first thing to understand about it. If it is to be received well and not passed over with the thought that it was meant for someone more advanced, more holy, more consistent in prayer than you. It was not reserved for souls who had reached the innermost dwelling places of the castle, she described with a beauty that still leaves first-time readers breathless. It was not addressed solely to contemplatives who spent hours in prayer without stirring, or to those who had achieved that mystical union she herself acknowledged as the center of the entire spiritual journey. The promise was addressed to those still on the way, to those who make mistakes and correct them and make them again and correct them again, to those who forget and remember, to those who have sometimes left the table bare without knowing what that meant, and who now, after everything they have heard, are prepared to leave it bare no longer on the nights that still remain. In the interior castle, Teresa wrote something that readers have underlined in every era and every language into which her work has been translated, because it has that rare and precious quality of sentences that seem written specifically for the exact moment in which you read them. She wrote that God does not look at the greatness of our works, but at the love with which they are done, not the quantity of what is offered, not the complexity of the gesture, or the visible effort that others might admire from the outside, the love, the interior love with which each action, however small and unremarkable it may look from the outside, is performed. And a gesture made in genuine love, as small as lighting a candle and saying a name and placing a piece of bread on a table before turning off the light and going to bed, carries in the spiritual world a weight that no grand work performed without love can match, however much it impresses those who see it. This is the promise. It is not vague or general or designed so that no one feels bad about themselves without committing to anything specific. It is particular. It is livable. It can be known in one's own experience by anyone who chooses to live it in the night still ahead. Teresa promised that the home that prepares itself with love during the days preceding Holy Week receives something that homes which sleep unprepared do not receive. Not as an exclusive privilege God grants according to some arbitrary standard, nor as a reward earned by stacking up acts of piety, but as the natural, inevitable consequence of having opened the door. Grace enters through open doors. It does not force its way through closed ones, not because it lacks the power to do so, but because it respects, with a delicacy that is astonishing, the freedom of whoever has chosen to keep them shut. What does that home concretely receive? Teresa described it in language that is at once spiritual and deeply human, grounded in the real experience of real people living real lives, with their difficulties and their joys and their tiredness at the end of the day. She described a peace that descends on the house the way dew settles on a field before dawn, when there is not yet enough light to see it, but the earth is already receiving it, silent, without prior announcement, without any spectacle for anyone to witness, but real, perceptible to the heart that has learned to be attentive to what arrives without making noise. A peace that does not eliminate problems or resolve the difficulties the family is living through. Teresa never promised that, and to have promised it would have been dishonest. But that wraps those difficulties differently. That gives them a perspective impossible to sustain without this peace. That allows rest in a way both the body and the soul are grateful for, the soul especially, because it knows where the rest comes from. And alongside that peace, something bearing directly on the departed. Teresa said that the souls who find the home prepared during these nights do something that goes beyond receiving comfort. They intercede. From where they are, with the intercessory capacity the communion of saints gives them, a capacity the Church has always recognized as real and active, they turn toward God with the name of that family in the deepest part of their being, not as a transaction between worlds or a calculated exchange of favors, but as the natural act of love that cannot hold still when it sees those it cares for doing what is right, when it sees it has not been forgotten, when it confirms that the love which sustained it in life is still sustaining it from this side of death. All of this begins tonight, not tomorrow, not when a better moment comes along, or a more perfect disposition, or more favorable circumstances. Tonight, before you go to bed, with what you have and from where you are, a cloth, a candle, something on the table, a name spoken in the quiet of the kitchen when everyone else is already asleep or has not yet come home, and the certainty, backed by Teresa and by the entire living tradition of the Church she loved, served, and gave herself to, that this gesture does not dissolve into the air. It arrives. God receives it with the same gravity and the same tenderness He brings to any prayer spoken on bended knee in the most solemn cathedral in the world, because He makes no distinction between the altar and the table of a home, when on that table there is genuine love, simple faith, and a heart that tonight decided not to go to sleep with the table bare. You stayed with this all the way to the end, not because time was plentiful or there was nothing else to do. You stayed because something in you recognized from the very beginning that what was being said had to do with you, with your home, with those you love, and with those who are no longer here but who in some real way are still part of what you are and what your family is. That is not a coincidence that can be explained by algorithms or by the invisible mechanics of a screen. It is something Teresa of Avila would have recognized at once and named without hesitation. It is grace moving a person toward what they need to hear, exactly when they need to hear it, even when they themselves did not know they needed it until it was already reaching them. What you receive today is not information. Information enters through the mind and leaves through the mind just as easily as it came. What you received today is something different. It is an understanding that settles deeper, in that place where the things that genuinely matter are held and do not leave, even as years pass and circumstances shift and the world goes on turning at its pace that pardons nothing. You understood something about the table that you had never seen with this kind of clarity. You understood that this piece of furniture at the center of your home is not merely wood and cloth and the everyday dishes. It is a spiritual space that speaks, that communicates something about the condition of your heart and your home that no words could express with the same eloquent silence. You understood that the nights between now and Holy Week are not ordinary nights, that the veil is thinner, that the souls of those you loved and lost draw near during this season with an ease they do not have at other times of year, that they come looking for something, that something is within reach of your hands, that setting the table before sleep, lighting a candle, leaving something simple, speaking a name with love in the quiet, this is not folklore or superstition dressed up in devotion, but an act of mature love that Teresa of Avila endorsed with the full weight of her mystical authority, and that the Church's tradition has upheld across the centuries in the most devoted homes throughout Christendom. You understood the warning too, not as a threat, but as the loving diagnosis of someone who looks at you with clear eyes and has nothing to gain from telling you anything other than the truth. Indifference does not feel like indifference from the inside. It feels like normality, like the natural rhythm of days following one another without pause, without anyone stopping to ask whether what is being done is what should be done. And Teresa invited you today to stop, to look at your table with new eyes, to ask yourself what that table has said during the nights of this Lent and what it will say during the nights still ahead. And you received the promise addressed not to the perfect, but to those still on the road. The promise that God does not look at the greatness of our works, but at the love with which they are done. The promise that a small gesture made in genuine faith carries in the spiritual world a weight that far exceeds what it appears to deserve from the outside. The promise that the home that opens its door during these nights receives something the closed home cannot receive: peace, the intercession of those already on the other side, the quiet certainty that you are not alone, not in this life, not in this faith, not in this love that does not know quite where it is going but keeps walking because it cannot do otherwise. That is what you take with you today, and it is a great deal. It is more than many people receive in years of spiritual searching that never quite finds what it is looking for, because it looks in the large places, and what it needs is in the small ones, in the everyday gestures, in the table of the home before the light goes out. Tonight, you have an opportunity. Not tomorrow. Tomorrow will bring its own opportunities and its own grace. Tonight, when the moment comes to head to bed, before turning off the last light, stop in front of your table. Place something there. Light a candle if you have one. Speak the name of the one you miss. And let that gesture be your prayer for tonight, as valid, as truly received by God, as any prayer you have ever prayed in your life. But there is one more thing I want to say before our time together ends. Something that has to do not with what is past, but with what is coming. Because what you understood today about the table and about these nights is part of something larger. It is part of a way of living the faith that Teresa of Avila practiced her entire life and taught with a generosity that made no distinction between souls far advanced and those still taking their first steps. A way of living in which the ordinary and the sacred are not two separate worlds that touch only in moments of intense religious experience, but the same world seen through the eyes of love and faith, the kitchen and the altar, the table and the tabernacle, the name spoken in the dark and the name written in the book of life before time began. Teresa spent decades learning to see that way, and she left behind the instructions so that others could learn too, not in a language reserved for the initiated, but in that living, direct voice that still carries the power to reach the heart without needing an interpreter or a translator. Her interior castle, her life, her way of perfection, her book of her foundations. Each one of those texts is a door, and there are many doors still unopened, many teachings of Teresa that bear directly on what you are living right now, in your home, in your family, in a faith that is sometimes as firm as bedrock and sometimes trembles like a candle flame in the wind. But that does not go out because something larger than itself holds it. There is something Teresa taught about what happens in homes that prepare themselves well for Holy Week, something that goes beyond the table and the candle and the name spoken in the quiet, something about what takes place in the soul of each person living in that home during the holiest days of the year, when the mystery of Christ's death and resurrection becomes so present it can almost be touched if the hands are clean and the heart is open. That's something Teresa described in words her sisters copied out more than once, because a single copy never seemed enough to hold everything they contained. And it is something you need to know before Palm Sunday arrives and the week that changes everything begins, because setting the table is the first gesture, but there is a second and a third. And Teresa described them all with the same precision, the same warmth, the same certainty of someone who does not speculate about the spiritual world, but has inhabited it and knows it from the inside. That is what is coming. That is what is waiting to be said. And when you hear it, what you understood today about the table will find its place within something more complete, more profound, more capable of transforming not just the nights of your home, but the whole of your spiritual life during this remarkable and grace-filled season. The late days of Lent and the Holy Week now drawing near. There is more, there is always more in Teresa, and the best is still to come. May God watch over your home tonight. May those who have gone rest in His peace, and may you rest in yours. May the candle you light before sleeping be the last gesture of this day and the first of the next, because the love that is expressed before closing one's eyes goes on burning while the body sleeps and finds its way to where it is meant to go without needing anyone to guide it. Saint Teresa wrote in the Interior Castle that the soul which has learned to love does not rest from love even in sleep, that something within it goes on praying, offering, remaining connected to what matters, even while the mind rests in the silence of dreams. That love which does not sleep is the very love God placed in the soul when He created it, and it cannot be wholly extinguished while the soul lives, because it comes from a source that has no bottom, no limit, no night dark enough to put it out. That love is you. That love is your home. That love is what you brought to this table today by staying all the way to the end. Until next time.